following account comes from a water-damaged journal recovered during a search and rescue operation in a remote part of the Appalachian Mountains. The search was prompted by the disappearance of Michael Trent, reported missing a week after the anniversary of his fiance's death. What remains of the journal records a haunting tale of guilt, loss, and a sinister presence in the fog. The journal opens with Michael reflecting on his grief and the hollow ache left by Rachel's absence. It was a car accident that took her, a random and senseless tragedy that left him spiraling. He writes that he brought the journal as a way to process his feelings, hoping that putting his thoughts into words might lighten the burden, even if only briefly. His intent is to burn the journal before he leaves the woods. Along with a few mementos, he was ready to move on. Michael's first entries reflect on Rachel and include scattered notes about his campsite, the reluctant fire he struggles to keep alive, the quiet shuffle of leaves underfoot, and the way the fog seems to loom closer as evening approaches. His writing feels scattered, as though he's trying to preserve fleeting moments of clarity while the oppressive stillness of the woods presses in around him. The fog wraps the forest in an unnatural quiet that leaves him feeling as though he's being watched. His sense of unease grows stronger as night falls, culminating with him sitting by the fire. That's when he hears it, a voice, unmistakably Rachel's, calling his name from somewhere deep in the fog. Against his better judgment, he rises, leaves the camp, and steps into the mist. He sees the silhouette of a woman standing just beyond the firelight. At first, he thinks it's someone else, her name lost to the faded ink. Instead of the dark, familiar waves of Rachel's hair, he catches a glint of blonde in the dim light. Panic builds in his chest as his mind races to understand her presence. But then the figure turns. It's Rachel. She smiles, heartbreakingly familiar, every memory of her rushing back in an instant. Her eyes glint in the firelight, too dark and too bright, and her voice, soft and inviting, draws him forward. She leads him deeper into the woods, her voice promising to make things whole again, to give him back what was lost. Despite the gnawing doubt in his gut, he follows. The fog thickens around them, muffling the world until only her presence remains. The majority of his account is illegible from the water damage. However, it is clear that Michael woke the next morning in his camp. He devoted many hours the next day to documenting and reflecting on the events in his journal. He writes of a bittersweet longing, a desperate hope of seeing Rachel again, mingled with an oppressive heaviness that hangs over every thought of her. He describes a weight in his chest, paired with a feverish exhaustion that worsens as the fog thickens, as though both are feeding off one another. He senses a presence in the fog, pulling on him. Fleeting shapes move in the mist, barely visible, and whispers drift just beyond the firelight, too soft to understand but impossible to ignore. Michael writes of another encounter the following night. Rachel's voice calls to him from the mist, leading him deeper into the fog until it parts to reveal a clearing in the woods. Michael recognizes it immediately as the site of their first camping trip together, a place etched in his memory. Michael allows himself to sink into the memory of lying under the stars with Rachel. She leans against him, her hand brushing his, and they point out constellations, laughing softly as she misnames them on purpose. From the fog, another laugh joins in. A faint laugh, so soft it could almost be mistaken for the wind. Michael sits up and scans the woods. He sees a figure at the edge of the clearing, barely visible through the mist. A woman is watching them from the tree line, the same figure Michael described seeing the night before. He notes the glint of her blonde hair cutting through the fog. Rachel, however, doesn't seem to notice. She shifts closer, her movements deliberate, her touch lingering on his arm, her grip tightening, as if she would never let him go. Her eyes catch his, gleaming with something deeper, something hungrier. She never stops smiling, as the laughter from the other woman echoes on the wind. The day Michael intended to return to civilization comes and goes. He stays in the woods, compelled by the chance to see Rachel again each night. With each encounter, her presence grows more vivid, but so too does the oppressive weight of the fog and the unsettling laughter of the other woman. The journal reveals Michael's belief that staying longer will somehow make things right, even as the encounters shift from bittersweet to deeply unnerving. Damage obscures much of the timeline, but one of the more legible entries describes an evening where the fog parts to reveal the restaurant where Michael proposed to Rachel. The scene is alive with candlelight, the low hum of diners' chatter, and the rich scent of fine cuisine. Michael finds himself seated across from Rachel, who smiles coyly, her eyes twinkling with an unsettling intensity, as if she already knows what's coming. He fingers the ring case in his pocket, checking it compulsively, his thoughts a jumble of excitement and dread. Their server approaches, and Rachel's smile widens slightly, almost as if anticipating something beyond his control. The server hands them menus, but instead of welcoming them, she lets out a laugh, mechanical and unnervingly repetitive, like a broken recording. Michael's breath catches as he looks up, recognizing the blonde hair reflecting the candlelight, undeniably the same woman he saw before. His words falter, but Rachel doesn't seem to notice the strange server. Instead, she tilts her head, studying him with a faint, almost amused smile. Michael suggests leaving, stammering something about needing air, but Rachel places her hand on his arm, her grip firm, yet gentle. "Stay," she says, her tone sweet and lilting. "I'm so hungry, and it's been so long since I've had such a delicious meal." The final entry is fragmented and frenzied. Michael describes following Rachel's voice into the fog again, only to find himself inside their old condo. The walls are just as he remembers them, filled with photos and mementos of their life together. It's the home they shared before the accident, the one he sold to escape the memories. He writes of sitting on the couch with Rachel, her head resting on his shoulder as they idly watch television, exchanging stories about their day. Her voice is bright and familiar, but dread grips him when she mentions leaving for her trip, the one he knows too well. He pleads with her not to go, but she doesn't seem to hear him, her words flowing as if his protests don't exist. As Rachel continues speaking, Michael hears sound coming from the bedroom, a laugh, muffled and repetitive, like a recording. An invisible force seems to pull at him, drawing him in. He steps into the room, the air thick and oppressive. The blonde woman sits on the edge of the bed, her smile sharp and knowing. The laughter seems to be coming from her, but her mouth doesn't move. His phone rings, cutting through the repetitive sound. It's Rachel. She tells him she's coming home early, her voice warm and excited. The woman on the bed opens her mouth and takes a deep breath. Michael stares at her, frozen with terror. He shakes his head, pleading. She laughs. The sound is no longer muffled, no longer hollow. It's clear, melodic. It cuts through the air like a blade. On the other side of the phone, Rachel pauses. "Who was that?" Rachel's voice tightens, a brittle edge cutting through the silence. "Is that Erica? You promised me it was over." Michael tries to speak. Not like last time. He's not trying to excuse himself. He apologizes. He promises it's over. He tells her to pull over so they can talk about this, but Rachel doesn't hear him. Her words are the same as last time. Rachel's sobs turn to screams, her anguish rising as she demands answers. Then over the phone comes the sound of squealing tires and the shattering crash of metal. Michael cries out Rachel's name into the phone, begging for a response. The only reply is the faint sound of pained, shallow breaths. And then nothing. Michael turns his attention back to the bed, but Erica is gone. In her place is Rachel, or what's left of her. Her skin is cracked, like porcelain, black tar seeping from the fractures. Her eyes, once warm and inviting, are now endless cold voids. Her mouth twists into a grotesque grin, jagged teeth filling the space where her smile once was. The weight of her presence suffocates him, pressing into his chest like a heavy stone. His breath grows shallow, and his limbs feel weak, as though something unseen is drawing strength from him. Her grin widens, jagged and unnatural, and the air around him grows colder, thick with a hunger he can sense, but cannot fully comprehend. The figure approaches, her cold, wet hand reaching up to caress his face. When she speaks, Michael hears the voices of Rachel and Erica interwoven with something darker, something terrifying. "You've come so far," she says, her voice dripping with sweetness. "Just a little longer now. Finish your journal. Make yourself perfect. For me." Her touch lingers, deceptively gentle, savoring his anguish like a fine meal. Michael writes of the strange, unrelenting draw toward her, the weight of her words pinning him in place, even as his strength seems to ebb away. She gazes at him, her smile stretching unnaturally, and murmurs, "You're so delicious this way." The entry on the last page is barely legible, smeared with water damage. Michael writes about waking in camp, disoriented and hollow, the fog clinging to him like a second skin. He notes how the compulsion to write has overtaken him, the words pouring onto the page not as his own, but as if dictated by her. The journal feels heavier, almost alive with each stroke of the pen. He stays, not to escape, but to obey. His final note suggests a reasoning that is both desperate and delusional. He believes finishing the story will bring peace, that it will somehow make things right. The last page of his final entry conveys a compulsion to finish his writing. At first, his writing feels hopeful, as if he is seeking some form of catharsis. But his writing devolves into rumination, condemning himself for his failures. He writes of his intentions to make one more trip into the fog, a final attempt to make things right. Thank you for visiting Archive 19. Your curiosity is appreciated. If you found this story intriguing, consider liking the video to help others uncover it as well. For more stories from obscure sources, subscribe to be notified when the next file is unearthed. New discoveries are released weekly.